We are on the frontiers of a new science. We're all starting to awaken to truths about who we are and where we're going. Open yourself to new knowledge about the power of spiritual energy and consciousness. Journey with Donna Smith-Moncrieffe as she takes you through the world of mediumship, energy healing, out-of-body experiences, past life regression, and all topics that demonstrate evidence of the true nature of our reality.
Welcome to On the Frontiers of a New Science. I am Donna Smith-Moncrieffe, and on today's show we will have a discussion that relates scientific facts with the survival of consciousness. Very few of us have had the opportunity to sit with an authentic physical medium and experience the materialization of someone who once resided on the physical plane. Given this limited experience, it is important for the population to hear how past scientists have provided us with key facts that explain the true nature of our existence. Today we have Professor Peter Wadhams to guide us through this discussion. He is the Professor of Ocean Physics at the University of Cambridge. Professor Wadhams is renowned for his 40 years of work examining how changes in the Arctic and Antarctic are impacting the world climate. So you are thinking, how does a leading scientist studying climate change become interested in metaphysics issues? Well, with no further ado, let's find out from the professor himself. Welcome, Peter, to the show. How are you doing today?
Any desperate thing to hang on to other than accept that something absolutely extraordinary was being reported.
Yes.
And so that never got accepted. And so we had this very peculiar schizophrenic status that he entered into, where he was continued to be incredibly respected for his discovery of thallium, discovery of his later work on cathode rays and discovering and inventing the radiometer. He was a very great physicist and president of the Royal Society, so he was incredibly distinguished, but his psychical research was ignored, and people just didn't talk about it, and it wasn't, even science would say, well, here's thallium discovered by Crookes, here's cathode rays, which ultimately led to the cathode ray tube, discovered by Crookes, but not here's materialization by mediums discovered by Crookes. That was hidden away.
Let's talk about that point for a second, because I think we're getting to the crux of the matter. You said, I love the phrase, it was just beyond the boggle level of the society. And what's amazing and very different about today's materialization, because of course we do have some authentic physical mediums in contemporary 21st century that are doing materialization, and in some ways full materialization, where reunion between a sitter and a discarnate can be achieved, because I've experienced it myself. What I find interesting that's different is we have pictures of Katie King. We have pictures of him taking her pulse, and even in those days, with pictures, it was still not enough for the society to embrace this. I would say the most important fact of the world is that we don't die. Can we just talk about that for a moment?
Yes. Well, firstly, there was an interesting note there that those photographs must have been taken in fairly high light levels, and so there didn't seem at that time to be any particular problem about light and ectoplasm, whereas these days materialization mediums seem to insist on operating in complete darkness. So it's very difficult to test them because you can't see anything that's going on. So that was one thing. But yes, the photographs were, as far as a conventional scientist is concerned, the only explanation would be a hoax, because there they are. There's Crookes has meticulous records. He said this is what happened, and at this séance, and I took this picture at this particular time, and you either have to say yes, he did. This great scientist did this, and therefore we have to accept that there were two persons present where the seance started with only one, and so this is absolute proof that materialization happens. Or you have to say the guy is a pathetic fool and hoaxer who expects us to accept this kind of rubbish when it's obvious that it can't possibly happen. And when people criticised him for that, he said, "Well, I never said it was possible. I only said it was true."
Exactly.
And that's and after which he retired, hurt from psychical research. But the thing was, there's a question where the very last thing that people will fall back on is fraud, even when the person who's doing the work is of an unblemished reputation.
Yeah.
But rather than accept that these results are genuine, people will say, even though this is a very great scientist, he's committing a fraud.
There's a large amount of documentation, however, just to add on to that summary that you did, is that when somebody materializes from the spirit world through, in the ectoplasm, if the characteristics are of a person that can be identified, that that they were not in the seance room before, and they are no longer living, then, and
yes.
This is an example of Katie King. Katie King was, to the population, she was in the physical words, she was no longer vibrating on our particular the physical plane, and so they saw her features. Perhaps they could have thought it was a double. Maybe we could go to all sorts of extremes, but I've always said is when we continue to have so much evidence, and when you look at all the different mediums, the Johannesburg medium, you look at the David Thompson now, Kai Mugi, the ones that are more contemporary. As you say, even though they're mostly working in dark, I had experienced things with voluminous plaque. We were able to touch certain things, which, for example, satin on Clinton Crisp, which materialized, and nobody had satin. They weren't wearing it. I was able, to follow up with sitters who had touched a baby's hand that materialized into the room, and there's no way you can create a baby's hand, which is so tiny. So there's so many things beyond the sort of the barrier of light that is happening in the 21st century that makes this phenomena still alive and well. Although it's very discouraging, Peter, when you really so eloquently laid out who Crooks was and what he was able to do with photographs. We just don't have that caliber of scientist right now that's brave enough to do these with even more research funding and have pictures to go with it. So it tells me that some of the work that we're doing in the 21st century may just also blither away.
Well, yes, that's true, because I think Crooks had such stature in science that if they don't believe Crooks, they don't believe anybody. You could have say if Einstein had the courage to do some psychical research experiments and got some positive results, they'd have probably disbelieved him and sort of said, well, he's gone bonkers. He may be good for relativity, but
exactly.
Don't
now,
expect us to believe this.
Before we go on to talk about Sir Oliver Lodge, Peter, I wanted to say, because I think I left that note on a very discouraging note, one of the things I do want to say about people who are still doing this research is that there is a determination beyond knowing that you're going to be recognized or that kind of thing. Because I know when I push to do my research, I'm doing it knowing that I stand alone, knowing that there is no financial benefit, knowing, in fact, that I do risk my good reputation in criminology research as I go forward in it. So one thing I just want to leave that on a positive note is that researchers are doing it, I also think, with the support of the spirit world, pushing us and motivating us, because it's for the planet, it's for humanity. It's like what you do with climate change, the 40 years that you've been trying to tell the public about the concern in relation to fossil fuel burning and global warming. You know it's not been popular, but there's something that still pushes you inside because it's about integrity. It's more than greed. It's not anything about financial or social status and recognition. Am I right about that?
Yes, you certainly are. I mean, I don't think I've gained anything in recognition. In fact, I'm about to be forced to retire by Cambridge University because of my age. So I don't think I haven't risen to dizzy heights through my work on climate change.
Right. So I just wanted to end that little piece on a positive note, not to all make us feel like we should just close up shop and stop, self-researching this, self-funding this. So just as we're going...
No, I agree with you. I mean, you're right, and I think it's very important that psychical researchers shouldn't give up because the history of the subject is a history of denial, and because in the end, the truth will out. And in the end, for instance, the fact that people talk glibly about a theory of everything, which is in my department in Cambridge, which is a physics department, everybody's looking for a theory of everything. And the famous film that's just out about Hawking is Theory of Everything. And Theory of Everything is some obscure mathematics that will unite all the four known physical forces, gravity, electromagnetism, and strong, weak nuclear forces in one complete equation that will explain everything, but leaving out psychical, the whole psychic energy and all of that. So they can never actually produce a theory of everything. And gradually, scientists and mathematicians are beginning to realize that there isn't a theory of everything if you're leaving out phenomena that are real. So it's getting into physical and mathematical science now that we have to take account of consciousness and psychic energy phenomena. We can't progress any further without it, and so there is a lot of grounds for hope. Yes.
No, that's a brilliant point that you make. So let's talk a little bit about Sir Oliver Lodge and his teachings about survival of consciousness and, really terrifying what he's put forward. Again, another scientist with a high level of status, and terrifying for the status quo, some of the things he put forward. Before you respond to that, I want to just pick out this quote that so nicely sums up some of the issues that happened to him. It says, the physics laboratory at Liverpool University is named after Sir Oliver Lodge. This is the man the experts, parapsychologists on paranormal phenomena are calling gullible whenever they get the chance. I don't think a physics laboratory would be named after a scientist who was gullible. So I just love that point because it sums up a bit of what we've been talking about. You name somebody because you put their name, you put them on a pillar, but as soon as they start talking about parapsychology, start to talk about them being gullible. Any thoughts about that you want to share about Sir Oliver Lodge?
Yes, and then I'll mention somebody today who's suffering from the same problem. Well, Lodge, he was a very great scientist. He discovered, he actually was invented radio, and he sent the first radio message in 1894, 2 years before Marconi did. It's just that Marconi got in there quicker with a patent, but Lodge really deserves credit as the inventor of radio. He was doing very early work with electromagnetic waves, radio waves, and he also invented the spark plug. And so he was he had a very wide-ranging vision in physics, and he was interested in psychic research at an early stage. He wrote a book in 1909 called Survival of Man, which again, when I was a student, I found a copy of this price sixpence at the second-hand bookshop in Cambridge, and so it had the name of a long-dead professor written into it. And so I bought that and read Oliver Lodge's first book on psychical research. But I think he was at Liverpool University. He then became principal of Birmingham University. So he was actually, which is kind of chancellor of the whole university. So he was already interested in psychical research and was doing it actively. And he asked them, this were more enlightened days then than today, he asked them, I want to carry on with my psychical research. Is that going to affect at all my position as becoming Chancellor of Birmingham University? And they said, no, that's fine, carry on. That wouldn't happen today. He'd have to conceal his interest.
Right.
But anyway, there it was. And he, because the big thing that happened to him with respect to survival was when his son was killed in the First World War, Raymond Lodge, and came through with a lot of evidential material, which he wrote a book about, and including a photograph that was not known about. Raymond Lodge described it in a séance, and then the photograph was sent later. Lots of very evidential material. And at that time, of course, huge numbers of people were being killed. And so when Lodge wrote his book on Raymond, it produced a lot of comfort for bereaved people whose sons or husbands had been killed in the First World War, that here was evidence that we survived death. So it actually achieved a very, very good effect at an important time, but again, of course, put him out of kilter with conventional science. But he wasn't as far. It didn't create such a shock as Crookes. He wasn't so far out as Crookes, I suppose. Mm-hmm. There was more acceptance of the possibility of survival in Lodge's day. And Lodge was able to even have a theory. One of the problems with psychical research in the early days, and in fact today, is there's no theory of how it operates. Nobody knows. There's evidence, overwhelming evidence that something is happening. There's real phenomena here. It's very, very important, but we don't know how it works at all, and so we're a bit floundering around, a bit like alchemists were before anybody knew about the table of the elements. They would make discoveries and discover new substances and compounds, and they have no idea why they were doing it or how it was happening. But he had a theory, which was that the ether was the way in which psychic energies were transmitted, and maybe also the way in which we can communicate with the dead, and that and also it may be the medium through which life continues. That the spiritual world is actually at a sort of different vibratory level
right.
in this thing called the ether. And the reason was that people believed in a stuff called the ether in Lodge's day, and it was believed that you needed to have this medium pervading the whole universe through which electromagnetic waves could propagate. So you couldn't have light or radio waves or anything propagating unless they had a medium to propagate in, just like sound needs air to propagate in. So light waves needed the ether. So the ether was invoked as this all-pervasive medium, and everybody accepted the ether. And so Lodge was the one to say, well, we're looking for a way in which we think we have all this evidence of survival of death, or we have also evidence of psychic energy being transmitted, telepathy and psychokinesis. Maybe the ether is the way in which this can be done. So he actually had, for the first time, a theory. The trouble is that the ether, it wasn't exactly disproved, but it was found to be not necessary from the work of Einstein, you didn't have to have an ether, that you didn't need a medium for light waves to propagate through. So the ether was abandoned, and so that was the end of that particular theory. The trouble is, what's ironic is that just a few years ago, because conventional physics is not able to explain the rate of expansion of the universe, scientists came up with another sort of ether, this dark energy and dark matter, which are, again, all pervasive. They don't have any properties that are anything like we understand. It can't be, the energy is not of a kind that we understand at all, and but it's there everywhere. Now, either it's the case that it really, so we could come back and say, well, maybe this dark energy can do the job that Lodge thought the ether could do. So you either have to say, you can either say, well, maybe dark energy is the key, or if you're more cynical, you say, well, dark energy has been invented because the physics mathematical equations don't work very well, and it will vanish again when we do better with our equations, just like the ether did. That's the strange situation. Right.
So basically, we have two great scientists, Crookes and Lodge, who demonstrated a number of theoretical experiments. They were able to, as you said, you make some. He had, for example, Lodge. He had his own evidence from his son Raymond. He was also able to start having that discussion of ether. But again, in his particular case as well, people, would you say, still virtually somewhat ignore the whole aspect of how that substantiates current knowledge of, for example, the behavior of subatomic particles and the issue of vibrational frequencies. Would you say it's somewhat, they just don't like us making those links?
Yes, I think that's probably the case, and it's something, it's quite extraordinary. There's a very distinguished astronomer in Cambridge, and I won't give his name, but he constantly appears on television, and he gave us a series of talks about the cosmos, and he in one of his programs he said, "I'm very pleased that we now have such a tremendously complete understanding of the universe compared to the way things were in the past, that we understand the Big Bang, and we understand all the kinds of phenomena in space, pulsars and galaxy formation, and so on." So it's going through a list of all the things we understand, and then in his very next sentence he says, "Of course, there's this material dark energy which makes up about 90% of the energy in the universe, and we don't know what it is at all." Right. And suddenly he's admitting we only understand what 10% of the universe is made up of, after he said how wonderful our understanding was. So he kept these two things in different compartments of his mind, and didn't feel there was any incongruity in coming out with them in succession. He hadn't actually connected these things up, that maybe dark energy indicates we don't understand much about the universe. Yes.
And with that particular point, when we post, and thank goodness for the internet and YouTube, is when you have a read, I take a close look at the comments after these types of videos. People are watching these programs. People are listening to these type of radio programs. And when you read the comments, the population is very intelligent. They know the difference between contradictory comments, like the one that you just made an example, and their own personal experiences. They're asking good questions. They have their own spiritual experiences, and they are saying some of what they're experiencing doesn't add up to what some of the things they're learning in science, or they learned in high school, or wherever they learned it. And so I think that's the hope for the universe as we're moving forward is that we had these great scientists, we have continuing researchers that are still motivated and brave to go out there and provide the information, and then you've got the population who are having spiritual experiences, and those, they begin to just think. One of the things that I do hope that people will embrace, and just going back to that example that you made about the individual who made those somewhat contradictory statements, is that one of the things I think we all need to accept is we don't know everything about the way the world works. Stepping into a physical mediumship seance, some of how I know that for sure is when the control of the medium comes out and says, we're trying this experiment, we don't know if it's going to work. So even them, in the different in the space that they're vibrating at, we used to think that those in the spiritual world were all knowing, but no, they are experimenting with us. They're co-collaborators, and with that collaboration, we are learning together the way the world works, just by the things they ask. Did you see the hand materializing or no? Was the chair levitating high enough? They are not sure themselves. So we just go forward and understand that we don't know everything about the universe. We won't be so full of ourselves, and we will be able to start accepting and opening up and researching without having them being so fearful of losing reputations.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, I think there's if you look at the journal of the Society for Psychic Research, this latest issue, there's a kind of inspiring preface by the president who said the dam is bursting as things are changing. That that there's now, because of the efforts of so many people now in psychical research, trying new things. There's new organisations that exist to help people at least stay in touch with one another. Like, for instance, in America, the Society for Scientific Exploration, SSE, is a relatively recently founded body, but it's extremely good at doing the same sort of task as the Society for Psychic Research still does in Britain, of encouraging research, of holding meetings and conferences, and just so people don't feel even though there isn't a proper career structure for them, they're not alone, and there's journals that they can publish in, even if the pages of Nature are closed to them. There are journals that they can publish in and read each other's work. There is a kind of I suppose a psychic research. It has to be a mafia because yes. It's only got each other to support, but it is growing and pushing forward, and I think the dam is beginning to burst, and the resistance is being shown to be irrational in itself, a form of, I guess, materialism is a sort of a form of religion which is held on to for emotional reasons by scientists, but can be abandoned if evidence becomes overwhelming. Yes.
And with that great statement, the dam is beginning to burst. I think we'll close off our show with sort of that, we talked about things that, may have been a bit discouraging to the future of psychic research, but what you were basically saying is that we do need to continue to move forward despite potentially not having the structure or the incentive to do so. But the dam is beginning to burst. And I want to say to you, Professor Peter Wadhams, that it was so wonderful having this discussion with you. Your background and the work that you've done in climate change, and your ability to talk to us about some of the historical precedents that has been set and demonstrated for us in terms of psychical research, survival of consciousness, and generally metaphysics issues. I thought this was an excellent discussion, and I want to just thank you so much for spending time with us on the frontiers of a new science.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to discuss these things with you. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay, thank you so much, and take care. So why is it important to have credible scientists discuss the spiritual world and its impact on the physical? Why is it difficult to create an environment that allows a balance? This would involve having scientists with both views having an opportunity to discuss concepts such as mediumship, energy healing, instrumental transcommunication, astral travel, and the relationship with extraterrestrials in the mainstream environment. Millions of people are having spiritual experiences, precognition, out-of-body experiences, personal and unexplained healings, yet they are bombarded with debunkers and a worldview that suppresses and ridicules great thinkers about the nature of reality. Remember, you are first and foremost a spiritual being that comes forth into a variety of physical bodies to grow from your experiences. When you know something to be true and it can be productive and healing to the planet, stand up even if you have to do it alone. For more information about metaphysics, I cover key aspects relating to survival of consciousness and its impact on the here and now in my most recent publication, Medium 9, The Transformational Powers of Spiritual Energy. Join us next month as we continue to explore the true nature of reality right here on the Frontiers of a New Science.
Join us each week as Donna Smith-Moncrieffe explores topics related to spiritual energy and consciousness. Collaborating with other experts, they will share evidence and ideas for you to integrate consciousness-based ideas into your life for a positive transformation.